Hi guys, it's Mrs. Wallace. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information. That's a follow-up from the last Renaissance discussion we had in class. And, first of all, I hope everybody's doing well. I know a lot of you were really concerned the last time we met. A lot of people had the coronavirus on their mind, so it seems like the district, made a really good decision in terms of closing school. And we'll just do the best we can with some of the materials that we have to kind of capture the essence of the Renaissance. So last class, we were actually looking at some works of art. And if you happen to have that note sheet, feel free to grab it. We're looking at the shift from Middle Ages art to Renaissance art, and specifically look for, humanism, classicism, and naturalism. In class, we looked at the Berlin Yarrow. This was a very large-scale work of art, really representative of the Middle Ages. As you guys noted in class, the figures in the painting are really described to be to the people at the time as divine figures. We have in the Christian tradition the divine figure of Christ and Mary, so kind of mother and child, very, very common depiction during Middle Ages in Europe. And we note this as a Middle Ages work for a couple of reasons. In some cases, you guys noted the elongated features. There's a lot of abstractness. We don't really have a very realistic type of facial expression or hand poses. The body of the child is designed to be almost like an older man who's sitting upright, so kind of this bizarre scale. We also have a very flat, kind of look. The perspective is not three-dimensional. And context of the painting is very much otherworldly. We have kind of this gold background, and a lot of Middle Ages art would be reflective of some of those same types of things. Also note, the Byzantine influence. That's significant because as the Byzantine Empire was being conquered by the Seljuk Turks, piece by piece by piece, it doesn't really fall until the mid-1400s, but up until that point, there are actually intellectuals who are fleeing the Byzantine Empire, and we see movement of some of those individuals to places like Ravenna in Italy, and so the Renaissance ends up being influenced largely by texts that are coming from the Islamic Empire and also from Byzantine. And one way to see some of those influences is in the works of art. The actual design of some Byzantine icons to this day kind of reflect some of the style that's depicted here. This particular work of art is by Cimabue. It's also called Madonna and Child. So here we have very similar content, right? In the middle of the work of art, you can see the Mary and Jesus. This is not really the best image. If you wanted to, you could look for Cimabue's Madonna and Child, Google it, get a little bit better of an image. But there's a few things that are probably noteworthy here. This is also a Middle Ages piece, kind of traveling through the Middle Ages. This is somewhere between maybe 1280 and 1290. This is designed for a church altarpiece. So it's big, it's about 12 feet tall, and it would stand in front of a service that parishioners might see, upon attending a church service. So it's kind of, detailed to express some religious content. The thing that you might notice is that compared to the last one, there's many more figures in this particular painting, even though we still have the gold background, we still have the halos and kind of this overall, Byzantine look. Maybe we see the great chain of being depicted a little bit. Mary and Jesus appear to be like kind of top of the hierarchy. They're flanked by angels who we don't really know if they're flying or standing or whichever, but they're on either side. And then in the bottom, we kind of have these new figures who are likely disciples, prophets, likely figures from the Old Testament, who are kind of representative in the painting. Like on one hand, they're in the painting. These would be mortal, men whose significance in telling maybe the story of Jesus and Mary might be noted. But this is a very earthly type of kind of a depiction. So, maybe we see some movement towards something like humanism. At the same time, the great chain of being is very Middle Ages. There's a clear depiction of kind of, the heavenly on the top and the manly, on the bottom. And also, we notice the flatness is still very much the case, although there's some attempts at perspective, right? There's a sense of trying to create, some height, a throne of sorts. Maybe, Mary, who's like this very, very large figure, is kind of sitting sort of, on some type of throne. It's not really clear exactly what kind of space this is and where these individuals might be. Looks almost like the basement of some sort of crazy chair. So the perspective is definitely not displaying, realistic three-dimensional space, something that we'll see when we look at Renaissance art. So definitely Middle Ages. And if you're interested and you want to look at the work of Giotto, Giotto is an Italian artist who's often referred to as like the father of Renaissance, art. In a few decades after Cimabue, and Giotto is actually like a student of Cimabue's, there is another depiction of Madonna and Child, and it's, the clothing, the ways in which the seating is occurring is just much more realistic. So this is like an effort that artists are making during this time, right? And we see kind of this move beginning with certain artists like Giotto, like Cimabue at the end of the Middle Ages period. Just to give you like a sense of difference, this is Fra Filippo Lippi. This is in the High Renaissance. So if you look at the dates, whereas the last two paintings were from the 1200s into the early 1300s almost. These are the 1400s into the 1500s. So the time period in Florence, Italy, that's known as the Italian Renaissance. So this would be a part of that. And notice a few things. And we can kind of suggest some humanism as well as some naturalism here, and also classicism. Kind of use this painting to kind of depict what those three things are about. So first of all, if you look at the characters that are in this painting, the individuals in the painting, they look much more human, right? So that abstractness and elongated features. For example, it's a little bit hard to see here, but we have like a face that's peeking out. So, if these two are like angels and this is Mary and this is Jesus, we don't have a change in the content, right? It's still Madonna and Child with angels. But this looks much more like a baby, complete with like little chubby fat rolls. You feel like pinching his cheeks. His hair is a little wild, and he's reaching out for his mother, maybe typical as a baby would. Mary, who is depicted, as almost a Renaissance woman would, a fashionable Renaissance woman. She is notably, kind of decorated. Her hair is kind of done. She's got a veil of sorts and some type of soft headwear, but she also has some like blonde curls and kind of this, Renaissance era headband thing going on. There is a halo, but it's very soft lines. There are a lot of soft lines in general, kind of indicative of Italian Renaissance art. She is jeweled, and even by her chair, there is a, looks like almost like a little jewelry box of sorts right here, with some jewelry that's peeking out. Might even be some rosary beads or whichever, but it seems as if she's kind of pious, but the angels and the baby are kind of, moving toward her. So very different humanism is different here, because we get like a much more realistic kind of human model for some of the religious content. Even the angels, kind of look like children, right? More than the wings are almost like you kind of miss them because you're really looking at the faces, which are depicting kind of that impish grin or something like that. So very, very different type of thing. In terms of naturalism, if you look toward the background, this is not that gold lame, kind of, heavenly type of setting. It looks as if this scene is happening almost in front of a window, and it appears that the background almost looks, sky, maybe some buildings or mountains, maybe it looks like a river back here. So very earthly scenes, right? So this idea of naturalism is that we're setting kind of the scene in somebody's home with their jewelry box next to them, in their own clothes, kind of with a scene in the background that is very, very natural, despite the fact that this is still meant to be kind of this religious content that people would get during this time period. They would see the halo and kind of recognize, what this was about. The other thing that you might note is the idea of classicism, which we tend to see in art that is in Italy at this time in the Renaissance, not so much in the Northern Renaissance. Classicism is borrowing some of these like geometric, mathematical kind of uses that go with classical art. So some things might be just the use of sculpture alone, but in this painting we see almost like this kind of triangular form to the way that the individuals are organized, and there's like a square in the background, right? That kind of very geometric approach that's almost like perfect is very much a classical form. So lots of evidence of that. I'm going to just talk about this next one really briefly, just kind of flip back to here. This is what this particular triptych, it's a 3-part painting, looks like. It was in New York for a while in the cloisters. This is what it looks like if you were standing in front of it, so it's not super big, right? And again, this still has like religious content in it, right? So, a lot of the art of this time is religious, although we're looking at not only the way in which the content comes across to look at like elements of humanism, but also, some of the technical aspects, okay, that artists are really working with. And, again, you can Google the art to really get a better kind of sense of, looking close at the works of art. So this is a Northern Renaissance painting, right? So when we say Northern Renaissance, we're talking about Germany, maybe Poland, England, the northern area that today would be like Belgium. Sometimes we'll see artists from Flanders, for example. This particular Northern Renaissance painting is from the area of Flanders, and it's the workshop of Robert Campin. So we don't know who the artist was, but somebody from this craft shop who was working, with other artists to produce works of art, and the workshop was run by Robert Campin, produced this art. And art historians believe that the middle part was likely done first and was probably available for purchase, and then some patrons, likely a married couple who wanted this painting for their home, decided to purchase it and likely put themselves into the painting. So what's significant about these people on the left is they might be a newly married couple and now they're in the painting, right? So it's kind of like the portrait, type thing. Sometimes in the Renaissance, we see artists themselves putting themselves in the painting. In this case, the patrons are in the painting. So it's like a little fame going on here. The main content of the painting is really happening here, okay? And this is likely a religious scene. We know that because we see this, wing. So this is an angel. This is likely Mary. And this time she doesn't have like baby Jesus, who's going to be this divine figure in Christianity. But this is the scene where she's actually told that she will be giving birth to this divine figure, and we can see that because through the window is this flying, kind of angel with a cross, who is about to, declare, to Mary what her, new kind of role is going to be. And she is likely reading the Bible, and we know that there's some symbolism in this. The Northern Renaissance painters loved their symbolism, so this painting is loaded with it, but I'll give you one example. The candle, which has been extinguished on the table, is likely out because now there has been divine presence, so the candle goes out, and people at the time would recognize that. There's also symbols of fertility in the painting, so a variety of things that would be meaningful to help tell the story. So some things to pay attention to. Northern Renaissance often is set in a very everyday life. So here we have kind of a cramped house quarters. Even though the scale is a little wacky, there's an attempt at perspective here. We get a sense of Mary being forward and maybe that, kind of window, in the back demonstrating what's outside, and that's further away. But we don't really have a clear sense of the perspective. The table is kind of like all over the place. It almost looks like it goes right back into the wall. Mary's like sitting kind of on a bench, but not really. So there's a little bit of weirdness, and that's also very typical of Northern Renaissance. The same with the very straight lines, which you note on the dresses. The Italian Renaissance is known for their soft circular lines. Here we're getting a lot of like kind of sharp lines, but Northern Renaissance painters play a lot with color. One of the reasons for that is that oil paint, compared to tempera paint, oil paint is actually found and used first in the northern Europe. So that actually gets borrowed later during the High Renaissance. So I know I'm going to run out of time, but that's what's really significant about this painting. She is kind of symbolic of this larger content, but it's kind of squished in an everyday scene. The gentleman to her right is likely her husband, who's making a mousetrap to catch the devil.